and then just scroll down and see.
I think while we get Alex set up, Constance, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off just in the sake of time, and since we've got folks who have joined us. So again, this is the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners Supporting an Equitable Water Future breakout session. We are joined by Constance Haqq, Chief Administrative Officer with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and Alex Margevicius, who is the Commissioner of Water for Cleveland Water. I'm hoping we'll see him back here in just a moment. We are going to be giving, our office has been fortunate over the last few years to be partnering with the Sewer District, Cleveland Water, and a number of other great local organizations around this issue of water equity. We were convened by the U.S. Water Alliance Water Equity Task Force. I'm not going to go too much more into that because I don't want to step on the toes of Constance's presentation. So she's going to give a little bit of background on sort of how we got here and some of the work of these partners, what some of our local institutions are doing to support water equity, and then the outcome that came out of the development of our water equity roadmap and all of this work. So with that, Constance, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, Kristen, are you ready? Can't hear you.
Constance, yes, I am all set. And I will, you just say next slide and we'll be good to go.
Okay. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope Chief Administrative Officer at Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and I'm joined by Alex very soon, I think, on the call. Alex and I are very happy to be able to present the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners. Next slide, please. What we'd like to discuss and highlight today is the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners, which is a new organization. We're also going to talk about an equitable water future roadmap, which is a study that was done over the last 2 years on the Cleveland area. We also will talk about our first program as an organization of Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners called the Water Champions Program, and then we will hear questions and answers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Greater Cleveland Water Equity organizations, we've come together to ensure that Greater Clevelanders have access to clean, safe, affordable water and an equitable water future. Our organization grew out of the former Cleveland Water Equity Task Force. It was a 2-year initiative of the U.S. Water Alliance. In 2018, the U.S. Water Alliance convened diverse teams from 7 United States cities to engage in a 2-year exploration of water equity. And those issues we looked at both nationally and locally. The Cleveland team has elected to continue the work of water equity and form the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners at the beginning of this year. Next slide, please. These are the organizations who are part of the group of folks, but we are continuing. We're interested in doing this work with us. Next slide, please. So what is water equity? Next. The U.S. Water Alliance provides.
I'm there now.
You're here, Alex. The U.S. Water Alliance provides this definition that focuses our. I like as what water equity looks like in its present. So water equity occurs when all communities, drinking water and wastewater services, when those communities are resilient and other climate impacts, when they have a role in the decision-making process, communities are in the economic, social, and environmental studies. How Alex is going to walk you through what we studied for the achievement of water equity are. So next, turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Constance. You hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And I do apologize for the little technical glitch up front. All the fun we're having these virtual days. Okay, so yes, the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners worked on and created this water quality equity roadmap, or just the roadmap for short, if you will. And the effort began with studying socio-economic and demographic backgrounds of Cleveland. And you can kind of see them on the slide there. Elements looked at were population, race, ethnicity and language, income and employment, poverty, educational attainment and literacy, housing and residential segregation. Now, it's important to understand the landscape of our community because water challenges are tied very closely to economic, environmental, social, and geographic conditions. Now, the roadmap appropriately did focus on Cleveland, but it's also important to consider the demographics throughout our service areas of both Cleveland Water and NEORSD. We're both regional utilities that cover very large service areas. The social and economic diversity of our service areas are important considerations when discussing areas of focus and looking at available solutions. Some of our inner ring suburbs, for example, have significant challenges as well. If we could go to the next slide. So what challenges did we find when we took a look at this? A big one revolves around aging infrastructure. Both Cleveland Water and Regional have to address aging infrastructure as the costs of maintenance and repair rise. Now, we are almost entirely, both of us, reliant on ratepayer revenue to fund infrastructure projects, meaning ratepayers are directly bearing the growing burden of infrastructure costs. 30 years ago, the feds paid for maybe a third of reinvestment in wastewater infrastructure, but not anymore. Every utility would love to spend more on reinvestment, but there's an appropriate balance that has to be struck that takes affordability into account. Now, on affordability, when you think about water affordability, you usually tend to think about bills, rates, customer assistance programs, and that's understandably so. But for utilities, for us, it's also important to think about smart operations as we plan our projects, as we manage our budgets, and we implement technologies. Can we do them in a way that creates stable, predictable rates and minimizes the burden on ratepayers as much as possible over the long term? We need to better understand what affordability looks like for our customers. Now, there have been traditional ways that affordability has been measured. The US EPA has criteria, but that's being looked at much harder now. There's a little bit of criticism, for example, that maybe it does not take into account the whole picture of either a household or a community. There are some newer methods being looked at out there that are more holistic, and they're being looked at locally and are gaining some traction, although they're really not that widespread in the industry yet. From a water quality point of view, Cleveland and Northeast Ohio has consistently high quality drinking water, but still some challenges remain. Drinking water quality issues generally are not focused to very localized area. They tend to be larger service area issues And that can affect affordability from an operational perspective. For example, the cost of having to replace lead service lines or adjusting treatment for possible new regulations all can affect affordability. Some hot topics and examples of water quality issues that we face on the drinking water side right now include harmful algal blooms and the related hypoxia or dead zone events that can occur. Microplastics in drinking water are gaining a lot of traction these days. And of course, an issue very hot right now are PFAS, these eternal chemicals, if you will, that are out there. From a sewer perspective, there are concerns that include combined sewer overflows during storms and the impacts that they have on lake quality. Another major impact that was looked at was climate change. Now, changing climate can lead to more extreme events, and those pose risks of infrastructure failure and floods. Warmer lake temperatures, for example, could mean more algal blooms. More extreme temperatures in the wintertime can lead to an increase in main breaks. A few years ago, we never even heard of the term polar vortex before. Now we've had a couple of them in the past few years. More frequent and severe storms can cause flooding, especially in urban areas with more impervious surfaces. It's the older, more vulnerable communities generally that experience more flooding, and those can have a negative health impact. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of our recommendations that were derived. A big area was on affordability and public engagement. Can we bolster our existing cost-saving programs? You know, when we took a look at what we're doing here, we think some of our affordability programs are actually good programs. But what we want to do is increase enrollment in them. Can we get more people that qualify enrolled in these existing programs? We do want to review the eligibility criteria, the opportunities to expand the eligibility for renters, for example, and maybe as well aligning our criteria with other assistance programs such as HEAP. You know, folks who have to go through the application process, working with different criteria can be maybe more of a challenge than it needs to be if we can all get on the same page criteria-wise. We think expanding some conservation programs and plumbing repair programs makes some sense. You know, water and sewer bills are based essentially on the amount of water consumed. So the easiest way for residents to save money on both bills is to use less water. Low-income families generally are more likely to live in homes with issues like leaks or inefficient fixtures that can run up their water and sewer bills unnecessarily so. So if we can target some conservation programs and expand plumbing repair and replacement programs to those communities, we think that may be a good strategy. We wanted to do targeted outreach and identify those most at risk to ensure that the information reaches where it's most needed. We're also going to be launching, and Constance will get into a lot more detail on this, though, a champions program, a water equity champions program to get the information out in a better way. Climate impacts and resiliency, we talked a little bit about that. So there's an intent to identify the areas in the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change impacts. And so some resilience initiatives like green infrastructure projects can be implemented in an equitable way, trying to target those areas that have the true issues. The group considered expanding existing tools, publicly available climate planning tools, like the Smart Cities tool that the Trust for Public Lands has out there, and maybe synergize with other climate initiatives out there with Cleveland's Office of Sustainability, for example. Lastly, on workforce development is a big key as well. Can we do better there? Can we do more evaluating of existing water-related workforce development programs? Ensure that they're reaching the vulnerable communities and populations. We should consider workforce development aimed specifically at connecting vulnerable communities to sustainable water sector employment. Let's get those folks employed in the water sector. We can review contracting processes. I know city and regional already do a lot, but is there more that we can do? Can we explore other ways such that the benefits of infrastructure spending can accrue to members of the vulnerable communities? And lastly, how about building some interest and awareness about water-related careers in youth throughout through some education programs? Both we and regional, for example, participate in a program called the STEP program, where we try to get young people involved in water-related careers and expound interest to them. Are there more that we can do along those lines? So those were the essential results and conclusions from the roadmap. And with that, back to Constance.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention our first program, the first program of the Partners Group is called the Water Champions Program. This tied to the recommendations that Alex just went over. So this first program is going to recruit that are most vulnerable here to water and climate barriers that residents in those communities have to accessing services. Sessions provide information about affordability opportunities and funding for this program. The funders you can see on the slide, and it will be housing partners. So we're very excited about the Water Champions program. We had hoped to start by July of 2020, but COVID had other plans. So we're currently for the Water Champions position. And if you know anyone, please have them contact CHN House. For those, so there is an email address for you to, you see it? Kristen, do we have another slide? There we go. So please send your inquiries, and if you're interested in joining a committee, please let us know. So thank you very much, and we're ready to take questions.
All right, thank you both very much for your presentations and the summary of the Water Equity Partners. I want to thank Liz Barlick, who is in our session here. She just put in the chat a link to the Water Equity Roadmap. So for anyone that is interested in learning more about that, I would highly recommend diving in. I think it goes into a lot more detail of what Constance and Alex have highlighted here. So I want to invite any of our participants to please post any questions that you have in the chat box. I have a couple questions that I'm gonna sort of kick things off with while we wait for questions from our audience. So, you know, speaking just personally, I have seen through our work with the Water Equity Task Force and the U.S. Water Alliance, learning a lot more about what it really means to properly engage your community and to do that in an equitable way. So I'm curious, you know, how the organizations of the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners have modified their outreach and engagement efforts around water affordability and equity as a result of participating in the task force with the U.S. Water Alliance.
Start. You went in and out a little bit, but I think I know what you said, Kristen. So impactful in working on the task force for 2 years with a Cleveland team, most of whom the organizations and individuals knew already. We knew each other, but we really got to know the work that each other does, and we took a when we together looked at water equity issues. So I think all of us were made stronger, and we see the relationships that we built through we've gotten a lot of information from the other 6 cities that participated: Atlanta and Louisville and Milwaukee, New Jersey, to name a few. And so these organizations and some of the work that they're doing have definitely.
To add, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So a couple things, and I think there were some lessons learned here in all of this for us as well. You know, and we've done some reevaluating of what we do. One example is for our homestead program, which is one of our affordability rate programs. We're doing more outreach. We're doing, for example, print ads on the senior transportation connection vans and buses to try and target there, if you will. We do have an outreach team that has been going to community events, not so much, again, as Constance points out, during this virtual time of the pandemic. But nevertheless, we're targeting a little bit better where we're sending that outreach team. We're sending them to minority communities, to vulnerable neighborhoods, for example, where the message about affordability programs perhaps is more of an audience there that can hear it, you know. And we're telling that team that's going out there, let's, you know, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should be doing more listening than telling, you know. Listen about both, if residents out there have thoughts about both existing initiatives and maybe they've got their own thoughts out there about some new things that we should be thinking about. So going into more of a listening mode, going into the right areas and neighborhoods, I think are some important changes that we're doing here.
I totally agree. And, you know, I think meeting the community where they are was one of my biggest takeaways from that whole experience. And to your point, Constance, interfacing with those other cities was very beneficial to know that, you know, we're not alone here in Cleveland. Buffalo, who's just a few hours away, faces a lot of the same challenges. And sometimes water challenges are actually building and housing challenges. They may not always be, you know, just strictly a utility problem. So I think it also helps just look at sort of the comprehensive picture that we have to paint when it comes to water equity. So we have started getting some questions in from our audience. Thank you. This one's from Wendy Kellogg. Has the work to identify vulnerable areas been started or finished? Does this involve generating GIS maps with data that can be shared?
Yes, the answer is yes. We identified 5 areas within Cleveland that we want to focus on. We based that on shutoffs and delinquencies and issues of poverty, and that I'm sure that can be shared.
I think just to maybe add to that, that is also sort of helped drive where we're seeing our water champion efforts. Is that, would you agree, Constance?
Champions will be working in those areas that are most vulnerable. And so we wanted to, Alex said, we really want to start by listening to our communities and listening to the residents and to eliminate as many barriers as we can. We've been at the sewer district, we've just service rep focus on seniors. And so we've been spending a lot of time, and we got this idea over the last couple, those residents in our service area, and also the service providers of senior information that they need and support. So there are a lot of things that that we've done to begin to make access easier for people.
You know, I would add too, some of the analysis that was done showed really strong correlation between water stress and just general economic stress. All of the metrics and indicators of poverty and of housing issues and everything else correlate with where shutoffs have happened, for example. So, I don't know necessarily it was a, major revelation of new areas that weren't kind of already known as far as where people are struggling some, and basically the same locations where water stress is occurring too.
There was a follow-up question. Can you share those 5 areas? And then that is not out in the public.
Sure. It's Haqq, Slavic Village. Can you remember all of them, Kristen? I'm sorry, I should have brought the.
I know the Metro West / Clark Fulton neighborhood also in there, and
There's another one.
the Kinsman.
Yes.
And maybe Glenville.
Yes, I believe Glenville.
Great. So those have only just been recently established, if you can tell by us trying to remember them. But, I think one of the things that I really appreciated about the Water Champions model is that we are really trying as much as possible to potentially recruit a member of one of those communities because they're really going to know their residents. They're going to know the what the community faces, what their concerns are, and hopefully be able to better connect them to some of these resources, which is ultimately, so the goal of the program.
The other good thing about having the Water Champions housed at CHN Housing Partners is because they work with individuals that with issues that run the gamut of poverty. So a person might come with an issue, but they're going to make sure that they know about resources for a lot of other issues as well. So, and they also are very connected in the communities that we are that we have targeted. So we're extremely happy with the champions working with their staff.
We have a question from Carol King, a recent Cleveland transplant and longtime water quality / coastal resource management and community outreach professional. Came a little bit late to the session, but was wondering if there's any talk about public beach access and equity in regards to beach access for low-income communities. Now, I know for both of you that maybe is a little outside of your realm in terms of when both of you think of water equity, but if you have any thoughts on that, it also looks like Brenda from Cleveland Water has shared some a response in the chat as well. Thank you, Brenda, for adding that.
We have about that, as a matter of fact. One of our more recent partners had done a listening session over the last few years called Shut Up and Listen, and they went out and talked to residents, and one of the things that they learned was that who live often think of the beach and access to the beach as being something that white suburbanites, in some cases, are not welcomed at the beach in their talked about in terms of equity.
And just to give a quick little plug, we are having a breakout tomorrow on park access. So for me, beaches sort of fall within that park, under that park umbrella, and we will be having a session tomorrow with some folks from the city's Parks Department and also Trust for Public Land.
Kristen, yeah. Real quick, just a quick comment on that, and I think really a shout out to the regional sewer district is regarding harmful algal blooms and the warnings, the beach warnings that go out there. And it sort of seemed like, man, who ought to own this issue? Who should be doing this? And it's like regional jumped into the breach and has issued those things and are giving great notice to folks about when it is safe to be at the beach or not. And so folks have better information now regarding when they should go to the beach and maybe not. And again, it's a really great thing that regional has done.
Thank you.
Kristen, we're not hearing you.
Thought I would make it through this without getting to unmute myself, and that just didn't happen. Well, at least I got it out of my system, right? I have a question for you that sort of will, we also have one from Ari Rosser that kind of piggybacks on this, but what do you see as the biggest threats to water equity before, during, and also as we recover from the pandemic? And please feel free to highlight any specific examples that either you or some of our water equity partners have implemented. And then just sort of adding to that, if you have any ideas for safe community engagement strategies during the pandemic, please feel free to share them.
I didn't hear all of that. The first one was the biggest threat to
water equity before, during, and as we recover from the pandemic.
I will always say that the biggest threat to water quality is awareness and education about our water is the lack of awareness that people have as to what we do, how we're the infrastructure that's underground, you don't often see. And I think it's really, so some relatives before I started working for the sewer district had no idea what happens when you flush the toilet, but they know now, in great detail. Lack of awareness and a need to understand the importance of infrastructure, the importance of water quality, the importance of water conservation starts because, as people say, when you know better, you do better. And so we have a great lake here, 20%. And we are charged to be stewards of that water and protect it. And so I will always say that awareness is the number one issue. Hopefully post-COVID, we'll do something about it.
Kristen, let me jump in on this. I think in this whole framework, in this whole discussion about affordability, there is the potential, and there was a really great article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about this potential huge bubble that's building up about unpaid utility bills, okay? Regional sewer and us, per the directive of the governor, stopped shutoffs. And there are some utilities that have resumed, but we have not yet, and there's no firm plans at the moment. But there are utility bills that are unpaid by a lot of folks, and folks who are in economic distress, who maybe have lost their job. And if it's, boy, do I pay my water bill or do I buy food for my kids? You know where that decision is going to go. So a backlog of unpaid bills is growing for all utilities everywhere. And it's not just the water utilities, it's the electric bill, it's the gas bill, all of them that deferred shutoffs during the pandemic. And there's been, to a large extent, deferred rent payments that folks are getting behind now. These bills have not been erased, okay? There's still monies that are owed by these residents. And when that bill comes due, how are we as a society going to deal with that? I think that's a great unknown right now. I know in Washington, D.C. that they've been trying to come up with one more stimulus package for another trillions of dollars, perhaps. And there's been a lot of discussion in the water side. On the utility side, can utility bill relief be a part of that? Can we somehow figure in there getting some federal dollars that could be used for folks who are in trouble with utility bills, with rent bills, with everything that they may be stressed and dealing with? And I think that, to me, that is probably the biggest issue of all that I can think of coming out of this pandemic. When that time gets further along and maybe the pandemic starts to get behind us, how are folks going to pay these bills? I think that's a huge question that I don't know that anybody really has a great answer to just yet.
Sure, and that's a great point. I think maybe to follow up on that, tying back to what was saying before around education and awareness, are there any sort of strategies we could be taking now to sort of prepare our residents for whatever sort of hit might be coming when they do resume sort of the charges? Any thoughts on that?
Both Cleveland Water and the Sewer District have reached out to our customers. Our campaign is called We're Here to Help. We're trying to prevent people, one, feeling as though a moratorium on payment and collections is not the same as a debt relief. So we don't want people to get to the end. Reaching out qualify to kind of get ahead of that in a way that makes sense.
I'm going to tell you, Constance, you were a little patchy there, but I think we got the sense that there's a lot of sort of proactive outreach that you're doing. Alex, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, no, Constance is exactly right. We've been reaching out to our customers, those that are perhaps vulnerable or getting behind a little bit, advising them about payment plan options, for example. Call us, contact us, work with us. You know, it is interesting. One of the interesting metrics that we found were those folks who have enrolled in our affordability programs over the years, only 3% of them suffered shutoffs. So like if you sign up, you know, we work with you and you continue to have service. So that is one of the big messages that we push, is try to get into one of these programs if you're not. You know, it's interesting. We have discussions with water utilities all around the state. We have a monthly call with other utilities, and there's a line of thought that says, you know, are you being more considerate of your customers if you don't let their arrearages build up so high that they get into such big trouble? Are you better off resuming your normal collection policies? That's a tough question. It really is. Which way to go on that? And at least here in Cleveland, we are not yet in a position of saying we're going to resume the normal collection activities, but continue to try and work with folks as best we can.
And you know, it's so hard to navigate in such an unprecedented time that none of us have really, you know, we don't have a guidebook on how to navigate some of this. We've got another question from our audience. Daniel Lundberg asked, the revised lead and copper rules are pushing for full lead service line replacement. What options are the Cleveland Water Department pursuing to help low-income communities replace the customer portion of the lead service lines? I know lead's a big one for you.
Yeah, and that is an interesting issue. Cleveland Water, we're an older legacy community. We have a lot of older lead service lines in the system. One of the interesting things we are finding, though, fortunately for us, Columbus sees the same thing, is that there is not a ton of lead service lines on the customer side. As we go about and do our work, we're logging every time we inspect and see the owner side connection, and we're seeing only 7%. So that's actually a good thing. So it's not as huge as an exposure as you might think. We do have, as part of our protocol, anytime that there is work, for example, on our side where we're replacing the city side connection and we disturb the property side, we are replacing it on our dime in those cases. But that's not a universal policy yet where we're simply replacing customer sides. We are taking a look at are there other options that can be used out there. Cincinnati, for example, does have some assistance programs. The US EPA, he's talking about the lead and copper rule. And we are expecting that should be released very soon. There's some expectation that it may be out before Election Day even. So we are waiting to see what the final requirements. We are hearing some things about what may or may not be in there in that respect. Some of that may be required. Draft versions we've seen do not obligate the public utility to actually fund the replacement of the customer side, but at least offer like loan type programs to help fund that. That is something that we are looking at. I do need to stress, though, that we do add orthophosphate to the drinking water, and it does an outstanding job at reducing lead levels in the drinking water. So we are extremely low levels, and low is a relative term, I suppose, but our water is extremely safe by the current federal measures of what lead needs to be. Yes, thank you.
Home without it. And if I do, I'm immediately thirsty as soon as I realize I don't have my water bottle with me. I have another question, shifting a little bit more towards the climate change side of things. So here in Northeast Ohio, I think we are expecting the weather changes that we're going to see as a result of climate change to be sort of warmer, wetter, and weirder. So warmer temperatures, obviously a lot more precipitation, maybe less snowfall, but looking more like rain. And then weirder, but fortunately in Cleveland, we're used to some sort of weird weather already, but I think we're going to see that become a lot more extreme. How are either of your organizations or any members of our water equity partners starting to deal with these impacts or maybe prepare for them? And then what are some things that you're encouraging residents to do to help make their households more resilient?
Okay, so you're talking about the increased rainfall, correct? I'm sorry, you went in and out.
Yes.
At the water management program, and that program is designed to look at 4 large studies which throughout our service area, which is Cuyahoga County, most of Cuyahoga County, a little bit beyond, to look at the patterns of water flow and water quality issues. We monitor the amount of rain. We have rain gauges throughout. We are, as everyone knows, seeing much stronger, much more frequent storms. And so that is a concern. And so issues of flooding, erosion are the on a daily basis. In terms of conservation, we do not have a conservation program in and of itself. And people to have a better understanding of what they can related to water. And so that's something you'll hear more about from us.
You're on mute again, Kristen, but that's okay.
I'm kind of waiting for you to start talking before I unmuted,
Okay.
but
yeah, no, not a problem. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about climate a little bit. And I guess in my mind, there are wintertime type effects, maybe, and summertime type effects. In the wintertime, I think I mentioned earlier the fact that we've had at least 2 recent winters of polar vortex here, of extremely bitter cold. That is that the kind of more frequent extreme events that could be facing us? Possibly. We do know a couple effects on the drinking water system that happen when it gets that bitter cold. We do get a lot more water main breaks, and that's upon us to try and deal with. Residents themselves can also have issues with freezing conditions. We do get an increase in the number of plumbing that freezes, for example. If a resident has plumbing on an outside wall that's poorly insulated, for example, when it gets 10 degrees Fahrenheit or below, we'll get a rash of freezing of those. So we put a lot of guidance on our website for customers of proactive things they could do to try to make their homes more resilient. Resiliency is the key theme overall. And the U.S. EPA required all water systems recently to do a assessment of how resilient they are, sustainable and resilient they are to potential upset conditions. One of the hallmarks of the Cleveland water system since I've been here is the extremely strong reliability and redundancy of the system, whereby we do have more of one of everything, if you will. If one big thing goes down, we have enough resiliency in the system where we can continue to provide water service to everybody. During the summer season, there are other parts of the country where they are more water stressed than here, where basic fundamental supply of water is in question. And if they get hotter, drier seasons and summers, will they have enough water fundamentally to survive? It always amazes me a little bit. I just keep thinking somebody in Arizona or California or somewhere, just one big thing to break or go wrong, and they could have a huge problem maybe. Sometimes I just wonder. And you do wonder about, will they ever get to the point, and they seem resistant to it, but would they ever get to the point of saying, we just can't continue to sustain population growth like this and have enough water for everybody, where they get to the point where they start to discourage any of that? I don't know that anybody gives too much of an interest to do that. It doesn't seem out there. They still say, yeah, you want to come. But long term, we like to say here that we got plenty of water and we're ready for you. And if you want to move back here where we got plenty of water to service you, more than happy to do that. On the warm weather side, I think some of the things that I've seen folks speculate about is Lake Erie could get warmer over time with climate change potentially. And does that lead to more harmful algal blooms, more algae growth on the lake, more issues with that? Hopefully not issues like Toledo that happened a number of years ago, where for 3 days a major municipality was out of water. And related to algal blooms are dead zone water or hypoxic conditions, where as the organic matter dies, settles to the bottom of the lake, oxygen levels get very low, and that can lead to water treatment challenges for us. So those are all things that we think about. Not so, in the drinking water business, we like to say that there are 3 things you think about. You think about source, treatment, and distribution. And until recently, we didn't give source a second thought. Lake Erie is nice and full, never drain that thing. So we didn't think about or worry about the lake from a water quantity point of view, but we sure do think an awful lot more in recent years about water quality, about what's going on in the lake. It never ceases to amaze me, the complexity of Lake Erie, the physics, the chemistry, the biology of everything that goes on in there. We're learning more and more every year and every day. We do a lot of research with partners out there to understand the lake. Again, we are trying to think about climate considerations as we move forward.
Yes, Lake Erie is definitely a great one. It's my favorite. Could you maybe expand a little bit more on kind of what you were saying there? I think you hinted at some of it, making the connections between some of, say, the harmful algal blooms and water quality, and then ultimately how that's going to impact equity from a ratepayer perspective. Because, it sounds like there's a lot more that goes into it to treat this water when we experience some of these things.
There is, and you have to be on extremely high alert. It is treatable, but you need to be on extremely high alert. You need to be able to address it as it's coming at you, and that's some of the focus that we have. We have put water quality monitoring buoys out in the lake during like 9 months out of the year. So it's out there telling us in real time what's going on in the lake. Harmful algal blooms has deleterious effects other than just drinking water. What it does to the ecosystem of the lake, what it does to recreation on the lake, all these other considerations that are out there, and so much large consideration. I like to say that the water treatment plant, the drinking water treatment plant, should not be the first line of defense for water quality issues or Lake Erie issues that are out there. It should be one of the last line of defenses. And prevention ought to be what the bigger consideration is. And balancing the interests of the health of the lake versus the farming interests that are out there and the nutrients that they add in on the Western Basin is the balance that we're struggling with right now, I think. Minimize, I think most people agree that minimizing the nutrient loading into the lake, minimizing the phosphorus and nitrogen that are getting loaded into Lake Erie is an important thing. And how do we get from here to there is what we have to figure out.
Great. We're getting near the end of our time, so I want to just invite the attendees. If you do have any final questions, thank you, Sarah O'Keefe, for chiming in here. I'm going to say this may be our last question because we're getting close to the time. How do you see the abundance of water as an obstacle to creating and enforcing policies that protect clean water sources like the lake and river? It's a good question, Sarah.
Certainly we're not on paying attention to the amount of water we have, because like they are in California or Arizona, because they have periods where they really have drought and have water stress. So that may be an obstacle for people, for our community to pay attention, because you can look out and see that beautiful lake and say we're good, but all of the things that Alex mentioned and that we know, we have to start paying attention to. Partners is really an organization for people from all walks of life and with all different interests to come together to really look at these issues and to begin to look at what it takes to be a real steward of water quality in our community.
And I guess I would just jump in and reiterate the fact that while quantity may not be so much the issue here, perhaps like in other places, quality is certainly a big issue. And there are emerging issues that are coming out there that may be future regulations on. PFAS is huge in the drinking water world right now. Fortunately, right here, it looks like we're not so bad, but we have to keep our eye on that. And if there are regulations that occur, that we have to be prepared to address it. And in some cases, they won't be cheap. Some other parts of the state of Ohio right now is doing an evaluation of PFAS occurrence throughout the state. And there are some locations that may have some tough choices and expensive choices that they may have to make. Microplastics has been big in the news recently. Tiny bits of plastic that are out there. What are the true health effects of that? I don't know. That's really well known yet. But those are all things that we have to keep our eye on and focus on, regardless of how full the lake may be. We have to pay attention to water quality.
And I think what Alex is really saying is that here's our dilemma. We have to make infrastructure investments. We have to make sure that on the other hand, we have to afford to contribute to those investments, have an opportunity to have the same clean, safe, affordable water that everyone else does. So it's that balance. And part of it is we are relying on our ratepayers here in Northeast Ohio to put the entire bill. We need Washington to help us to make infrastructure investments and to develop a program like they have for the heating industry, for heat, that is addressing water and sewer as an issue. So there are a number of fronts in which we're working and issues going safe. Water's in the business to do, and that's what the sewer district enjoy the work.
Excellent. I think I'm just speaking personally here, but we may be a little spoiled in the Cleveland area because we do have such great water and wastewater utilities that it's so easy to turn on that tap. You know that you're always going to have good, clean, reliable, delicious water coming out, and it gets a little, when you don't see it in front of you all the time, maybe if we're in the Western Basin seeing some of those algal blooms more regularly, it's easier to be more conscious of it here locally. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this presentation. So again, this is the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners Supporting an Equitable Water Future Breakout Session. We want to thank both of our presenters, Constance Haqq and Alex Margevicius, from Cleveland Water and Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, all of our partners on the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partnership. They are all really great to work with, doing some awesome stuff here. Want to thank Cleveland Public Library for being our host for the whole summit. And just as a reminder, Liz had shared a number of resources in the chat. You can also visit the waterequity@gmail.com. Send an email if you want to stay involved with the Water Equity Partners, sort of as a follow-up from this presentation. So with that, we will wrap things up and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.